We're going to start with this panel session, looking at value chains within the broader grains and oilseed sector. Obviously, this is a major sector in the South African economy. It involves a whole lot of different crops. It's diverse. It adds a lot of value to the country and includes staples such as wheat and maize, which are critically important to food security in South Africa. So we are joined today by three eminent panelists that play a big role in the value chains. David also from AFMA, CEO of AFMA, Boikanyo Mogatli, who is the CEO of National Chamber of Milling, and Peter Lovelace from the Yonko. I hope I pronounced it correctly, Peter. But welcome to the panel. We're really honored to have you and looking forward to your insights in the panel. David, I'm going to kick off with you. And I'm going to ask to give us an indication of the role that AFMA plays within the broader value chains. You are involved in a number of value chains, but you're sort of the central link between the grains sector, animal feed, into the animal sector. And what is your approach to this value chain and the role that you play?
John, thank you for the opportunity. Yes, as you've mentioned, it is quite an interesting link where we sit and find ourselves as an animal feed manufacturers industry. We were quite fortunate where we find ourselves. It's actually in a triangle, and where we find ourselves is between the grain and oilseeds value chain as well as the livestock and animal value chain. So that is quite an interesting place where we find ourselves, and a very good opportunity. And it's also embedded in our strategy as AFMA has put it down, because we see ourselves as a thought leader in the value chain, influencing food security through our partnerships with all stakeholders in the different value chains. And of course, why we're saying this is the fact that we want to unlock sustainable growth for all role players in the value chain. Now, you would see our partners, of course. Definitely, you can't go forward on a policy, way if you don't involve government. So government must create the environment where you can operate within, but you can't operate if you don't play a role in your value chain. So upstream as well as downstream, we find ourselves in the middle of the processing of the animal feeds that, of course, at the end of the day, lands on the plates of the consumer. So that's our approach. You can more or less, picture us as Switzerland. We're neutral. We are a service company or a nutrition company trying to assist our value chain partners in the best way possible, and trying to get the flow as smooth as possible from the producer up to the processor of the protein at the end of the day. And that's where we position ourselves, and we would like to project ourselves, and we will also, in the process, want to put ourselves in the value chain as a supporting industry, supporting our fellow value chain partners to unlock their growth. And of course, if they grow, we grow. It's the same situation with the poultry industry, the pork, red meat. So if they are successful, it filters down to the producer at the end of the day as well.
Well, David, what sort of growth have you experienced over the last, say, 10, 20 years, just on average? Because we've seen consumer patterns changing, and we've seen a bigger move towards higher protein diets, higher value-added diets. It has created opportunity. And do you see that growth to be sustainable going forward?
John, growth, if I define growth, it's more, and then I talk about feed sales, and that is determined by, of course, consumer patterns. I would say in the late 80s, beginning of the 90s, there was enormous growth in the poultry sector because poultry is your cheapest source of protein, and of course, I would say the most versatile type of protein that you can use, and that's in the format of meat, eggs, and all the other products of poultry. During, I would say, the mid 2000 and around about 2008, that growth peaked around about 10%. That's now per annum on feed sales. Then, of course, we had that economic meltdown in 2008, which caused enormous, can I say, injury to the industry. Growth was negative for mainly all the, can I say, sectors. Luckily, we didn't go negative. We only went down to a 1% growth, just I would say just below population growth at that stage. After that, we recovered to more or less 3-4% per annum, and then, of course, I would say the second wave came along, but unfortunately, it was a triple whammy. It was the big drought, it was the exchange rates, and then, of course, the dumping of illegal poultry in our market. That's, I would say that was in 2014, around about 2013 onwards, and it's still the case. To such an extent, when that three factors, I would say, got together, we actually went 6% negative in feed sales. So that was a great shock to the industry because feed sales never in the history of AFMA went negative. Fortunately, it recovered as the economy picked up a little bit, and nowadays we grow around about, say, 2%, more or less the population growth. And it all depends on the policies of government, of course, creating the environment in which we can operate. The fact being, AFMA being the biggest supplier to the poultry industry, and around about 99% of all AFMA or can I say broiler feed is manufactured by AFMA members, and around about 70 to 80% of all laying hens feeds are manufactured by AFMA members. So the whole situation of the Poultry Action Plan will greatly also benefit us once it's fully in action. So we also, there's no, I won't say there's a specific pattern, but we also, but like any other economy or sector, we are influenced by external factors. And of course, I think we all know that the fact that your feed price is the majority of your feed price, around about 85%, constitute of raw material cost, and that is bought in dollars. So you would imagine what the effect of the exchange rate, specifically nowadays, does to a can I say, importer of raw materials. We are estimating around about 600,000 tons of oil cake, soya oil cake being imported this year. Of course, this will be can I say, quite an expense to us due to the exchange rate. I mean, the price, international price doesn't change, it's our exchange rate that's to our negative. And that, of course, causes a cost squeeze in the value chain. And somewhere the feed manufacturers can of course, being vertically integrated with their poultry companies, can absorb some of these costs, because the majority of this is a cost plus arrangement between, I would say, the holding companies within a holding company. But the cost squeeze can only be absorbed up to a point, and then you have to give the cost increase through to the consumer, unfortunately.
That actually brings me to the next question, and that's around our marketing system. Basically, grain is traded through the JSE commodities derivatives, or SAFEX as we used to call it. Market. Do you think that still is the right mechanism to use? I mean, we've heard remarks of coming even from political leaders that we might want to go back to single desk commodity boards and so on. Yeah, your membership and the sector that you represent, still happy with the marketing arrangements in general, that the free market, open market, supply and demand system works?
Yeah, John, fortunately, AFMA also runs the SACOTA Secretariat, that's the South African Cereal and Oilseed Traders Association. And we are definitely of the opinion that the free market must do its work, and the minimum interference in the market. The government mustn't get involved in the free market, that the market must do its work. It's like sometimes you will win, sometimes you will lose, but it's all about the expertise that you have to apply in these markets that will enable you to ride this wave out.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to come back to you later on the impact of COVID, so you can start thinking of that, and also what happens post-COVID. But can you come to you now on the milling side, the value-adding part, from the producers to the milling, both on the wheat milling and on the maize milling side. What is your approach to the value chain in the grains, in the milling industry, and then obviously even further on to the baking and to the consumer?
John, thank you very much. I must say that the Chamber of Milling, obviously, it's part of the value chain structures. And as you might be also aware that since deregulation, there was an essential need to, in actual fact, establish industry structures to be in a position to pursue the industry's best needs. And that's the reason why we have seen the culmination and establishment of the Chamber of Milling, and even beyond that, the grain value chain, which is the grains and oilseed structures under the auspices of the Wheat and Maize Forum and Oilseeds Forums, which in actual fact strive to pursue industry issues and not only stakeholder issues, because I think it is very imperative, and as the has already alluded to consult with government from an industry perspective. And I think what has been very critical to commend has been the concerted approach by the established forums, of which the National Chamber of Milling is part of. You'll recall even in 2015, for instance, having wheat being, South Africa being the net importer of wheat for so many decades, the Wheat Forum got together to establish or identify some of the most pressing interventions to resuscitate the industry. And I will have to acknowledge the fact that since 2015, obviously, the process has been very sticky. But I think being able to collaborate as industry stakeholders and putting aside our best interests as individual stakeholders and start to think from a value chain perspective is also an exercise on its own. But I must say that I think there was a realization for that matter that we, in actual fact, need to look at the resuscitation process from a broader scheme of things, not necessarily to the benefit of the individual stakeholders, but for the value chain as large. And this is the reason why we have, in actual fact, seen some of the interventions that have been put in place. It could have been much better, but I think the success, if we look back in where the process started in 2015, in terms of some of the interventions that were identified, in actual fact, have been accomplished to a certain extent. And I think this is some way a spirit going forward, to be in a position to collectively identify some common interventions as an industry, and therefore not only as a stakeholder. Of course, there will be instances where individual stakeholders have got their specific interests which they can individually pursue with government. But I'm looking at, say, for instance, an industry resuscitation here, and I'm referring to wheat, for instance. There have been some interventions that have been put in place. We've seen the change in grading regulations that was not only to the best interest of the few, but has been in actual fact put together to see if we can try and increase production locally. And there are other interventions, of course, which we have seen. We know that as an importer of wheat, South Africa is forever having to import not actually close to a small percentage, but as big as more than 50% at some point in time. This year specifically, it is envisaged that we'll be bringing 1.8, for instance. But one of the biggest challenges is that, and I think this is something that we will be speaking about from an approach to international market space, but I think government also needs to play the part in terms of creating an enabling environment from a policy perspective. And I'm here referring to policy, trade policy space. I think one of the challenges that we have seen was that since deregulation, I think it has been quite a difficult aspect to get government to create a more of an enabling environment from a trade policy perspective to allow the industry, in actual fact, the whole value chain to in fact take advantage of a global space. And this is purely demonstrated by the challenges that we in actual fact see ourselves confronted with in as far as the management or the administration of the wheat tariff dispensation is concerned. From the maize side, in actual fact, we are self-sufficient in maize, and under normal circumstances, in absence of drought and weather changes or patterns, we are self-sufficient, and we are, in actual fact, as an industry, are able to procure locally. And I think what I get from the millers is that it will be much more a preferred stance that we can procure our raw material locally, which is the reason or the spirit that, the effort has been put behind the resuscitation process as far as the wheat production is concerned. But recently, as you would know, there has been a little bit of a concern, especially it's not clear why it was because of the COVID, and I think we're getting to that, and I'm trying to tread very carefully not to venture into other issues that we'll get to, John. But essentially, a value chain concerted effort is essentially what the Chamber of Milling upholds, John. And I think the other principle that these structures have in actual fact adopted is the maintenance of the free market system. And you would know that obviously the futures market was established post-deregulation, and ever since it has been the principle that has been adopted at all these structures that the Chamber of Milling is part of to in actual fact allow a transparent and free market system to continue with very little or in actual fact no government intervention, as also David alluded to. So that's in a nutshell to say that it's a contribution that the Chamber makes in the global space, no, not in the global space, from an industry perspective, in as far as getting traction to consult with government is concerned. We know that government would like to consult with industries. Only on matters specific to a particular industry, say for instance the milling industry, then government obviously will consult with the Chamber of Milling or vice versa. But when it pertains to a broader industry resuscitation process, which includes every little segment of the value chain, then of course a more broader industry traction is required, is needed. And that's in actual fact how we view it, John, from that perspective.
Thanks, Makanya. I want to get back to the industry resuscitation because, as you might know, my roots are actually in the wheat industry initially, and it's a crop that's very close to my heart, if I may say so, as a wheat scientist. And one thing that has always hurt me is that we've lost a big part of our wheat industry. Now, the efforts have been really great, and some of them have paid off quite well in terms of the resuscitation. Do you think we can go back to a situation where, for argument's sake, we only import 20% of our needs and 80% we produce ourselves? Because it's a lot of wheat we buy now, approximately 1.8 million that you were saying, and one still gets the feeling that there's a lot of scope for import substitution, if I can call it that, for resuscitation, for creating a better environment. Where would you say are the next steps that we must take in terms of resuscitating the wheat industry?
John, I think the next step will be to, in actual fact, seeing that we have, in actual fact, managed to get the teething issues in place. And we definitely need to aggressively engage further at industry structures. And I know that it has been a very slow process, but you will probably recall that back in the days when the wheat strategy was developed, in actual fact, that was one of the most thing to can aspire to accomplish, which is the 80% level of sufficiency. And in essence, in the mid-80s, which is something that I sometimes refer to, South Africa produced almost 80% of the wheat crop. And that was probably the reason why the industry has, in actual fact, developed that as one of the objectives or a thumbs-up objectives to can try and or to strive to accomplish, because we have, in actual fact, experienced it. It happened, so it is not just a dream that has been, experienced for some way. So, but I think it is, in actual fact, possible. If, for instance, food security is quite crucial, and I think from, in actual fact, a political perspective, it is. And of course, if it gains momentum as well from the industry's perspective, and try and find some of the supporting measures, both from government side to try and put back the hectares that used to be planted on wheat to be active again. I think it's an aspiration of the value chain, especially the wheat value chain structures, to can see that happening. Like I said, that it is in actual fact the most preferred circumstances from the milling constituency that we would like to see most of the wheat being procured locally. I mean, imports are logistically cumbersome, and it would be much better to in actual fact buy home. But to your point, John, I think getting back to a more rigorous consultative approach from the industry and identifying some of the interventions that will reverse the situation that used to, in actual fact, prevail in the 1980s is essential. And of course, it needs a whole lot of concerted effort, and we need to put our own industry self-interest aside and look at it from a broader value chain perspective.
Thank you, Makanya. I think we might also have some climate change considerations also in the process, but it is something that I think we must continue with. I also concur with you in terms of the strength of the grain industry institutions, the forums, etc. So while there sometimes are disagreements, generally people see the bigger picture and try to cooperate to make things work and make our industries competitive. I'm going to get back to you too on some other issues later, especially on exports of flour, etc. And if you see markets into Africa that we should be developing. But I first want to get to Peter. Peter, you in the vegetable oils industry. It's quite a complex industry because we have the sunflower oil, we have the soya oil, and then we import quite a lot of palm oil, actually substantial amounts of palm oil. And so how do you see the oil, vegetable oil industry developing, and how do we improve the competitiveness to replace palm oil? Or do you think it's always going to be a substantial part of our vegetable oil industry?
Thank you, John. Just to introduce myself, because I think I was out of the room when you started the intro. Yeah, I'm Peter Lovelace, CEO of COCO, stands for Central Edible Oil Company. I'm also Vice Chairman of the South African Oil Processors Association. I sit on the Oilseeds Advisory Committee, and I sit on the soybean and sunflower forums as well. So I'm very much involved in the mechanics of the industry. To answer your question, John, I think the oilseeds industry has a relatively fluid value chain or supply chain. We very much rely on homegrown crops, i.e. sunflower seed and soybeans, and we supplement that with imports of either vegetable oil or actual seed or beans in their whole form. That largely depends on, and the factors that I think Devet mentioned earlier is, and you've mentioned is the growing conditions in the country at the time. Have we got the right rain? Do we get a drought? And what do the farmers plant? So it very much depends on that. But as an oilseeds, I crush both beans and sunflower. And if we could just concentrate on sunflower for 1 minute, I'm a little concerned as a major player in the oilseed in the sunflower industry that sunflower is becoming the ugly sister of the complex. With the advent of larger areas of soybeans and maize, sunflower seems to be getting pushed out a little bit. The area grown coming under a little pressure. To add onto that, the quality that we're now growing of sunflower with regard to the oil content in the sunflower seed grown in South Africa is deteriorating, and that is a concern to us, the crushing industry, because we crush sunflower for the oil content. It's an oil seed. So if we're getting lower and lower oil contents in the seed grown, then that affects our competitiveness and our cost structure. So typically, some South African sunflower today, the last 2 years, albeit that we've had late planting seasons because of weather, our oil contents in the seed are 37.5%, which is very low. To give you an idea, I personally exported, my company at the time, we exported a cargo of sunflower seed in the 98-99 season, which, if you remember, was the monster sunflower crop. That cargo went to Amsterdam, and on arrival in Amsterdam, 25,000 tons of it, tested at 42% oil content. So that gives you it's a story I keep telling, and everybody's bored with it, but it's very relevant that in a record nearly 1 million tons, I think that year, we produced an oil content well over 40%. Today we're struggling to make 38%. So that is a key issue for me in the sunflower industry. Just to give you examples, in Argentina, they produce 42 to 44% oil content. Russia, Ukraine, 44, 45, 46, along with other countries that grow sunflower, Bulgaria, Romania, 43, 44. So we've got a lot of work to do on that front. And I'm pleased to say that we are, the Oilseeds Advisory Committee and the other forums, we've recognised this and we're working towards trying to improve things.
Peter, can I just interrupt? Is that a genetic issue or an environmental issue? What is causing this?
It's a good question, John, and it's something that we debate long and hard. And I think the answer is a bit of both. I think there's no doubt that over the last few years, the seed companies and the hybrids that we're now breeding and using are geared more towards a yield per hectare as opposed to an oil content in the actual seed, because our industry and our futures market, which you alluded to earlier, doesn't actually reward the farmer for oil content. So naturally, the farmer, quite rightly, is going to grow as much per hectare as he can, and so it's up to us as an industry to try and change that view on life as to what we as an industry want, which is I'm busy with at the moment. DeVet and AFMA are helping me, and the oil processors as well, and the other advisory committee. So it's something that we're hard at, but to me that's one of our greatest challenges to the vegetable industry is the quality that we're actually getting. As far as the supply chain goes, I think, as I said, I think it works quite well. I think the futures market, to me, is a good tool for the whole of the industry. I think it's very relevant to the farmers. I've traded futures markets in Europe and in the UK, and this one here, the farmer can pretty easily calculate what he's going to get on his farm for his crops via the futures market here, or via Suffolk. And I think that's important. It's quite transparent, and I personally think it works well. Our value chain on both seed and beans is pretty good. We've got a good farmer basis where they're growing the crops. We've got co-ops, we've got farm traders, and we've got international shippers who then trade the crop and suppliers on an annual basis.
If I can just ask, in the sunflower, is the high fiber content of the rest of the seed, once you've crushed out the oil, can that be used better in the feed industry, or is it really much a waste product, or can you still mix a certain percentage into feed rations and so on?
Yeah, John. I mean, after we've actually got the oil out, as much oil as we can out of the seed, we're left with an oil cake, sunflower oil cake, which is a very good product here. A lot of it goes to vet. Talked earlier about the chicken industry, poultry industry. A lot of it goes into that. So we're big suppliers via the AFMA family to the chicken and the animal feed industry on that. And we work very hard at the quality and consistency of that product to satisfy their needs. And then the balance is you're right, is the husk, doppies, or skin, whatever you want to call it, which is around about 18% left, and that's a very fibrous material, which can be used as a filler in the animal feed industry, but more often or not is used as a energy source. We can burn it in our boilers for producing steam, and it's very efficient. It's obviously a green energy, so that's becoming more and more popular. Or we use it in the chicken houses as bedding as well. So there's not much that goes to waste crushing sunflower or soy. The soy is exactly the same thing. Obviously, there's more protein in soybeans and less oil, and we're crushing beans for the meal requirement that goes into is a big component of the animal feed industry, along with maize, and there's less oil. So we're crushing that for protein needs, really.
Just on the demand side of the oil, do you think we can plant quite a bit more soybeans and sunflower for oil too? Is there demand there? Will the markets can take it up and the crushing capacity?
Absolutely, John. 100%. Basically, South Africa plus minus uses about 1.5 million tons of veg oil a year. Okay. Of that, there's about 650,000 tons is palm oil. The balance, 800,000 tons, is basically split equally between soybean oil and sunflower oil. So, and what is not produced locally is then imported, nearly always in a oil form, rather than importing the whole product and crushing it here. So particularly on sunflower, we import about 150,000 tons of sunflower oil a year. So we can quite easily replace that with a local sunflower crop and crush it and produce it locally.
Well, that's good news.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got the capacity to do it. We just need to work on the hybrids. We need to work on the fact that we've got to encourage farmers to grow more sunflower, and we've got to have the climate, obviously, to back all that up.
Great. Thanks, Peter. I'm going to come back to you. Devette, I want to get to you. I want to talk to you about two things. The new Animal Feeds Act, or how far are we from implementation, and is it an improvement on the old Act 36? Because the regulatory environment, and you referred to it in your triangle, the role that government plays obviously is very important in the regulation of animal feeds. That's the first thing. The second thing is just is how do you see us accessing the SADC markets and even into Africa further in terms of animal feed exports? Is that an ambition that the industry has? Because you're a pretty good industry, you're a competitive industry, and one gets the sense that South Africa, with its production capacity in maize and soya, is improving. We're improving our competitiveness, and we should be accessing export markets even with a value-added product, if you understand what I mean. So those two questions, regulatory environment and an ambition to export.
John, thanks for that questions, but before I answer them, I just want to add to what Peter said and your question to him regarding are there capacity to improve on increased production. If you look at the AFMA Chairman's report, I compile the Chairman's report every year, and we run around about 500,000 tons of oil cake import from Argentina mainly. Now, we want to support the local industry, of course, much better. But the fact that due to, can I say, infrastructure constraints, and the fact that if you, by road, if you take a load of, say, oil cake from Randfontein to Cape Town, it costs you double than a ship from Argentina to Cape Town. So there will always be imports from at your coastal regions. And of course, there must always, if you look at big companies like Astral and RCL Foods, they always must have, can I say, a backup plan. And also, should something go wrong on the local side, they must be able to feed their chickens, because you know the enormous effect that if you don't feed chickens the right way, the can I say, horrific effect that can have on your performance of poultry. Coming back to the feeds bill, the feeds bill are quite far, can I say, progressed. The Department of Agriculture has gone through the whole process of, can I say, consultation throughout the country. It's now a question of submitting it to Parliament and it being, can I say, go through all the parliamentary processes. The feedback I have is that we are looking at around about, say, late 21, 2022, that feed bill might be promulgated. But if you ask, is it the improved bill? I would definitely say so. The bill was split up. You know, formerly it was fertilizer, animal feed, pet food, and stock remedies. Now, this bill now is only the feed, animal feeds and pet food bill, so that makes it a bit easier because the two processes are more or less up to a point very much the same. And then your, can I say, processing side is a bit different, and then of course the packaging also a bit different, but the selling of the product is more or less the same. I would reckon the inputs from industry was thorough, and it is a much improved, can I say, draft bill. I would also say that the bill makes provision for quite a number of leeway to both government and industry to come to the party and partner up. And I think that was the can I say, the spirit of how we drawn up the feeds bill. Of course, there will be industries that wasn't in the past included in the bill that will be now included in the bill. I'm talking specifically of the home mixer fraternity. That's the feedlots, also the independent poultry guys, and etc. But of course, you know, the bill, we always, people can shout and scream about the bill, but the bill is actually just stating the facts and stating what must be in place. I think the heart of the bill will come into place when we write the regulations to the bill. And that will, can I say, okay, this is how the bill will be implemented and this is how it will work. I think it's perhaps premature to, can I say, preempt what the regulations would say. But I would imagine if you look at our cooperation as a value chain, even and I think the value chain has now come much closer to each other in this COVID times. And I think the cooperation is very good. So I would imagine we will come to a good understanding and put together a thorough regulations to the act that will be the bill that will become an act. And that will be a much better improvement because, you know, the bill or the old Act 36 was approved in 1947. So, yeah, after a while, it doesn't cater for all the cases you can deal with. So that will be, I would say, a much improved effort. Coming to the market access to the SADC regions. We do cross-border exports. That's now Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Swaziland, Mozambique. Due to the shelf life of the product, of a finished product, that's more or less 3 months shelf it is better to export your raw materials and put up your processing plants in the country of where you want the product. You're also aware of our sister companies of our members. That's largely, I would say, besides South Africa, they are situated in Zambia. That's the second larger, can I say, concentration of manufacturing facilities of our sister companies. And of course, I see that there is scope for going north of the border. I would rather say the value-added products. Remember, we're not only, can I say, representing animal feed manufacturers, but also manufacturers of premixes, vitamins, minerals, and that pre-packs. I would say there's a bigger scope perhaps for that, going much further north than only SADC. I know people are going to DRC, they're going to Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, Rwanda, Somalia, Ethiopia. So that is a scope that we can further explore. And the efficiencies, and that's talking about distance of travel, your cost into north of the border is, I would say, our biggest benefit. To export from, say, Durban to Dar es Salaam, of course, it's much more, can I say, cheaper than from China, because as you know, our inputs for all these products mainly comes from China, referring to the premixes, vitamins, minerals, enzymes, etc. So I would say yes, definitely there is scope. But if you talk about finished feed, it's cross-border, and of course raw materials. But I think we should definitely look into the whole, can I say, space of using SADC as a better to our advantage, where the water is, of course, and dealing with climate change and all that. My personal opinion is grow all the crops where the water is and process the products where the efficiencies is.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Bukanya, back to you and the milling. And I understand that there's quite a growth in white maize meal demand at the moment. Have you picked up on that and the reasons for that? Bukanya, I think you're on mute. Hello? Bukanya? Yeah. There we go. Can you hear me, Bukanya? Yeah.
I can hear you.
Yeah. I just want to find out from you, over years, the demand for white maize meal has been very steady. But just lately, we have seen some sort of increase. Your explanation for that, do you think there's a growing demand going to establish itself over the next year or two or three with white maize meal?
John, yes. We have, in actual fact, received reports that there is no white maize available out there when when it's needed, and we've been trying to explore what could possibly be the cause of that. We all know that we are moving obviously from the old marketing season into the new, and one would perhaps expect that the previous crop depletion is probably at its bare minimum, and while we're still waiting for the new deliveries or deliveries for the new crop. But the question was as to whether has this been an annual experience, and this is something that I tried to get to understand from JSC as well. But I believe that the current situation is purely on the basis that there has been an exceptional demand for maize meal, at least in February and March. Needless to mention that we have also seen an increase in the maize exports to Zim. We're not sure because, back in the day, Zimbabwe was South Africa's #1 trade partner. As to whether we, in actual fact, going to that extent, but we would want to see more maize meal being exported than the raw material. But I believe that, and my consultation with members in terms of trying to understand what could be the problem, them, of course, believe that this is probably just a transitional period. And yes, there are indications that the milling figure, maybe most probably because of the demand and stockpiling for this period during the COVID-19 maybe. But I think there is, of course, some sort of an increasing in the milling figure during March and April, and hence the more unusual a shortage of maize meal, white maize meal out there. But this is obviously coincides with the move to the new season.
Right, so I think there's also been a bit of a quality issue with too much WM2s and 3s and not enough WM1. The farmers really want for the good quality. They won't come down that one. I want to just ask you on the wheat one, on the wheat tariff. When we speak wheat tariff always comes into the equation. Perhaps just give us a brief rundown on what the tariff looks like for our viewers firstly, and then the implementation of the tariff. How do we get the implementation to be more efficient? And you know that we've had these challenges of government announcing the tariff in time, and what the impact then is on buying patterns and on the industry.
John, the current tariff dispensation on wheat is in actual fact 20 years old. So it was put in place in 1999. So I think a dispensation that has lived for so long proves that it is in actual fact the best system ever. And as you would probably know, it essentially afford the level of protection to the entire value chain, mainly farmers, against the international markets or the international wheat prices. And how it operates, as you probably would know, is that when the international prices go down, then obviously the system will trigger a tariff to in actual fact adjust. And the opposite also obviously is applicable. If the tariff goes up, then obviously there's no need for farmers there's no need for protection for the farmers, and therefore the system will adjust itself accordingly to the extent of the level of the protection required. But the way it has been administered has not been beneficial to the entire value chain, to say the least, because the inherent delays in implementing the adjustment, do not afford either the primary industry or the secondary industry the necessary protection that is deserved at that point in time. And the reason why it's called a variable tariff system is purely because that it has to, in actual fact, respond to the variability of the movement in international prices. So we have seen, obviously, the delays from the administration part of it, purely because of from government side, to the extent that you would probably even have a more lagged basis, having two adjustments not even been implemented. But the wheat forum, in actual fact, in the past year or so, has been engaging with the Minister of Trade and Industry, and as the forum, and this is now the industry forum, we had a meeting with Minister Patel in August, who understands the system very well, and he was in actual fact sold and acknowledged the delays, and he undertook to in actual fact correct those. As an industry and the wheat industry, we were, concerted in the approach to consult with the Department of Trade and Industry, because one would think that as millers, we will probably rush to government if the tariff goes down, and therefore we'll expect the same from the farmers to rush if it goes up. But I think the common approach from the Wheat Forum is to say whether the tariff goes up and down, can we in actual fact provide market certainty? Because we'll know that obviously the domestic market is very much responsive to the variability of the tariff. And therefore the need for government to in actual fact apply and institute their trade instruments in actual fact imperative so that it provides some sort of a stability and certainty in the market. And of course, we don't even want to talk about how that impacts trade if the delays are in actual fact perennial, to an extent that you would in actual fact find a very destabilized market just because of the tariff.
Great, thanks, Lukanya. I think we still have some challenges around getting that implementation to the level that we want it to be. Are you losing your light?
Yeah, I'm not going Google, John. I was just keeping my light on.
Can I just ask you the one question you did start mentioning it just now, is how do you see COVID-19 affecting the milling industry and perhaps post-COVID-19 in the recovery phase? Because this is probably going to be with us for the next year to 2 years. It's going to impact on the way we do business. It's going to impact on the industry. It's going to impact on consumer patterns. How do you see, what sort of plans are you making from industry point of view?
John, I think some of the things, especially what we have seen, which has been a little bit of raw material price escalation, we tend to leave those as of course as, and those will resolve themselves. And of course, we have seen during the COVID period or the lockdown period a very upward movement in terms of raw materials. And of course, as I have already alluded to the fact that we expect to import more, at least 1.8 million tons of wheat. And of course, buying wheat from the rest of the world with dollars, with the current exchange rate not in actual fact in our favor. Of course, that obviously is going to have a significant impact in as far as the production costs are concerned. Now, essentially, these are basic foodstuffs, and we have heard even the Department of Trade and Industry, Minister Patel, say that let's just be cautious about price increases during this time. And, basic foodstuff, these are staples, John, and of course, one would say that it has got a very political interest in it. You can see a very abrupt increase in maize meal or flour, and therefore bread, of course, it will attract more attention than you see a price increase in coal or manganese. But the fact of the matter is, I think if from the wheat side, if we can just in actual fact try to increase our consultative engagement with Minister Patel, who fortunately undertook to try and resolve this, just to tap up on our last conversation, to try and put the implementation of the trade policy measures and having the wheat tariff as expedient as possible. We know the challenges that he has, that the implementation process starts at ITEC, then his office and goes to the Minister of Finance. But as an industry, that's not what we want to hear. This is government's responsibility. So we should not, in actual fact, hear Minister Patel says that, no, the problem lies with the Minister of Finance. I mean, they need to actually get the house in order, as we have done so as an industry. I mean, we used to come from very diverse, where we have interest in pursuing the less tariffs, and I know that the farmers would do the same when there was an increase in the tariff. But we have come to a common ground to say, let's in actual fact have a working system. he did undertake to make it work. And I think we need to put pressure in terms of getting him to to commit, to deliver in terms of his commitments. He's a minister and probably have much more important issues than working with the terror, but this is more important to us.
No, I fully concur, and I think as an industry we've got to work closer with him. Absolutely. Thanks very much for that. Peter, I'm coming back to you. I want to ask you, in the vegetable oil industry, what would you say are the three biggest risks that the industry faces, and what sort of outcomes would you like to see to minimize or mitigate those risks, to have a bigger, growing, more competitive industry?
John, I think as an industry, and I don't think it's just the oilseeds industry, I think it's the general, our general agricultural business. The volatility of supply of electricity has been a major headache in our lives, and it's extremely costly to all industries. I don't have to tell you all that, but certainly when it comes to our own industry, that is a major headache, and will hold us back being efficient and be able to have some real growth in our whole industry if that thing isn't leveled out and we get a constant, regular supply of electricity at the right levels. One thing having it, increase in prices year on year. There's another thing when the supply is so intermittent that we can't make plans on running our plants properly or efficiently.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Closely followed by that, I think, is supply of water as well. Another key problem in our industry. I know we're not having to do it right now, but I know other plants are having to transport in tankers of water every day to keep their plants going, which is a major concern. So I think, and the vet will bear me out on this, on the animal feed side, that has been a huge concern, along with the electricity. So those two figure very heavily in our outlook. I think when we get down to COVID, we've obviously got higher prices. We all know that because of the rand and because of basically because of the rand. What is the so-called demand destruction? High prices with restaurants closed. The snack industry is, and the fast food industry is battling big time because basically they're all closed. Possibly we'll get to a point now where the drive-thrus might open up. So in my particular industry, do the deep fryers, do they start looking to purchase vegetable oil again? Because at the moment they're not. The vegetable oil that's being supplied in the market is packed oil for us all to use to cooking oil at home. But the frying industry generally, deep fry. Going forward, will restaurants open? Will food outlets open? And what will the outcome of sharply higher prices be for demand going forward?
Yeah.
The other biggest problem, without saying, is obviously unemployment. If we see an increase in unemployment and everybody's purses are tighter, then that's going to lead to problems as well. We've got some real things to face up to.
Absolutely. Our challenges are enormous, but we've got to try and cooperate and see how we can manage these things the best to keep our value chains competitive. So thanks very much for that. Really appreciate that. The vets, just back to you. Perhaps we can start wrapping up now. But they basically the same question to Peter. I know the electricity or power supply has also impacted on you. What would you say are your three biggest risks or your three biggest disablers that you have in your value chain or your part of the value chain that need to be addressed?
John, I think the biggest risks can be grouped basically as definitely the infrastructure, which number one is definitely the load shedding, because you can imagine what cost it is to a plant when it's fully charged, and through the production process halfway the power cuts. If government can resort to a kind of system, because during the COVID period, we, of course, due to a lower demand of electricity, we were quite fortunate not to have any of this load shedding, and everything is actually running very smoothly in the feed industry. But we know the moment the lockdown is removed, load shedding will definitely kick in. The first thing is load shedding. If there's a schedule which they can keep to, people can plan. But unfortunately, the situation is they give out the schedule and it's not implemented correctly. So the people don't know when are you off or when are you on, if they can just stick to that. And then, of course, under infrastructure, water is just as big a problem. And I mentioned earlier on the whole rail cost and rail efficiency problem. I mean, if a rail wagon down to Cape Town costs you twice the price as a sea vessel from Argentina, that's really a problem. Then, of course, our road systems, due to the road traffic, because we have to revert to road, I would imagine it's now 85%, even perhaps more, of the inputs being transported by road, so that the roads will one or other time need to be upgraded because it won't hold. And then, of course, from a Sakota point of view, our ports and the capacity of the ports are very essential. I mean, if you have a look what's happening now, we need expansion, and we need specifically the Durban port to be deepened to be able to handle larger ships, because at the moment it can only handle a certain depth of the ships. And even Maputo Harbor has invested millions of euros to deepen their port, and it's actually deeper than Durban and can handle larger ships. To come back to post COVID the period, I think we all suffered more or less the same macro factors. Like we all know that locally food security is of the utmost importance. And then during this period, we got downgraded by all the, can I say, credit rating houses. So that was a whammy to us. Our exchange rate showed us what challenges we are facing. Luckily, the Reserve Bank's decrease of the, can I say, interest rate was a bit softening the blow there. But I can imagine if we start running again, we will see what the effect is. Too short of a period that we can see the real effect thereof. And the fact that only essential sectors are working at the moment is putting a very big strain on the social system in the country. You know, we would suggest in a value chain there's always the push and the pull action. At the moment, the essential value chains are pushing to keep the channel or the value chain full, but there's no pull to buy the food that's needed on the other side. So at one stage we will get to a place where all the storage are full and nobody actually can buy it because not everyone is working and earning money. So we would like, if I would say, we would like to propose that let's use a two-prong approach, restoring the balance in the economy, and of course staggered approach of opening up the economy in a responsible manner, with of course managing the risk of our infection and together with that ensuring the safe working environment for our personnel. Now, of course, that includes maintaining and increasing the testing, ongoing testing, and so on. Because the one thing that you would like to prevent is to have a plant being stopped because of a single infection. So we are quite happy or quite positive towards the whole concept of compartmentalization. So break your plant up or in sections, establish smaller groups working together in certain spaces, and there must be certain, protocols and plans in place that group handles. Stagger your lunch times for instance, tea breaks, that kind of thing. And of course, the facilities these personnel use can't be the same, or if you're forced to be the same, then you must have a team on site that disinfect that whole site about after use of every group. That's the risk mitigating factors, or actions that you can take. But definitely a two-pronged approach, get the economy up and running again, because there's only so long that you can hold out. And of course, ensure the safety of your staff and your personnel, because they are, I would say, our most important assets.
Absolutely. And very important. I hope we get those announcements tonight, because we've made some, as you know, submissions to the Minister and to the Presidency, and that there is a press conference tonight and the President will be addressing us on some of the relief measures. Obviously, also to stimulate demand, and I think we will also see some announcements in that regard. We've got a minute or two, if there's anything, Peter, that you want to add, or Bukanya, the vets, just any closing remarks, because I think we've had a wonderful discussion. We've highlighted the key areas, the areas that need addressing, the areas that are challenges, the areas that are risks, but also the opportunities. And as we go further in developing what I call our class food system, we really have excellent competitive value chain, and the challenge is always to improve on these, because that brings us food security. So any closing comments from your side?
John Peter, yeah. Just to back up what Devet said, our other biggest challenge, I don't want to get too negative, I'm going to turn positive right now, but just to finish off on that front, is the continuing decay of our municipalities and the infrastructure around our factories and our plants is another major hurdle that's holding us back. So on the positive side, we've worked as an industry very hard on getting our quality, particularly on soybean meal. We were a very large importer of Argentinian soybean meal. Now it's plus 1 million tons, and most of the production is local. That local production on that, and I now believe that we can challenge the imports on quality without any doubt at all, and therefore I think we've got a very bright future on that side, providing we can grow the crops in this country. I think our farmers are without doubt some of the best, and sometimes don't get the credit of what they do. So I think we've got a major advantage there. So there's some positive things happening in our industry, and we have to look for them and carry them forward.
Fully agree. Thank you, Peter. Bukanya?
Hey, John. One would perhaps just conclude by saying that it is probably the time to urgently transform the NDP imperatives into implementable plans. This is one plan that advocated a collective collaboration between industry, government, and other social partners. In actual fact, building some sort of growth to the economy. And I think this is an opportune time to begin to thrash that one out. I would say our economy, even before the COVID-19, was somewhat in the general ward, but I think the rest of the world is now in the ICU, and we need to, in actual fact, get ourselves out of that. But I think a very close cooperation, and one must commend, I think, the cooperation that we have seen that has been initiated by Minister Didiza. One would, in actual fact, aspire that it escalates to the other departments, and this should include the DTI as well, in trying to get our trade policies and agreements to work properly. And the other issue, you would know that it's still very much on the agenda of the Wheat Forum, is in actual fact the market access to the EU in as far as wheat is concerned. And that also is, in actual fact, forms part and parcel of the issues that we need to aggressively take up with Minister Patel in terms of resolving. We know that that quota was, in actual fact, intended to benefit the consumers, and therefore it really needs to be back to where it's supposed to be. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Bukanya. I want to say thank you to Devet and Bukanya and Peter. This has been great chatting to you. Always interesting to listen to how your perspectives on the industry. You all play a key role. You're all key people in these value chains, and we highly regard you and the inputs that you make into making South African agriculture such a success. So thanks very much. We really appreciate your time.
John, just before you go off, John, it's Francois here. I wanted to echo what you were saying, Peter, Boikanyo, and Devet. Thank you very much for your time. You're the second group this morning. I think listening through this morning and this session, we really need to listen to each other to understand the different parts of the value chain. And again, I say what I've said to the morning group that we've had. You're very valuable players, and the quality not only of your businesses but you personally. That's what makes it work. I want to commend you, and I want to wish you luck with your businesses. Thank you very much for the time. And then John, yourself has spent a lot of time this morning, hours, and your knowledge of the industry really helps the conversation flow. So we're going to not sit on this information. We're going to package it and let it go out as soon as possible, maybe even Friday, and then follow that up. So we're going to do the rest of the value chain. We're also now going to the primary producers. So this is really what we're trying to do, is create an understanding within value chains of each other's worlds, so that we understand that, again, I think the globalization is shifting to localization, and we all need each other to pull this through. So I have very high regard for you. Thank you very much for your valuable time and the knowledge that you shared. You're all heroes.